Hi, guys, and thanks. Thanks for coming back. Thanks for coming back to join me. This morning has been a test. Again, it always feels like a bit of a rush coming in. The trains have been up the wall, and you can never over prep for these things. And I've just been saying earlier that I find it really not difficult. I find it quite easy in front of the camera, but I find it quite difficult to formulate a subject and stick to it because my mind wanders all over the place, right? It goes from here to there to there to here. But I know the general essence of what it is that I want to share with you today. And today is, I really want to touch upon grief and loss because generally around festive anniversaries, birthdays, you can't avoid not thinking about the loved ones that are no longer here. And it is about that time of year where anniversaries are creeping up on us. And I think the reason why I wanted to share this is because when I lost my mum 20 years ago, there weren't these platforms that people were openly talking about it. There weren't these groups that you can join. Counselling and therapy were kind of shrugged. People shrugged their shoulders over it. They weren't encouraged. And I think if I'd had that, if I had those resources, and I just heard somebody else's story, because everybody grieves differently. That's categorically the thing. Everybody grieves in their different ways. But hearing similarity in people's stories can really make you feel more grounded in the way that you're feeling and not feeling as though, you know, you're an outcast. Unfortunately, we will all experience this sometime or another in our lives. And I feel that it's important to keep talking about it because I do feel that when we're grieving, you know, we are grieving loved ones, and it's by talking about them, you're not forgetting them. Because if you don't talk about them, then memories cease to exist and they just disappear. So for me to want to talk about it openly, I guess I'm going to have to share part of my story. And it's so 20, it was 20 years ago this year that I lost my mum. I was 22 when it happened. And even though we knew that she was sick, it kind of escalated really, really quickly. I think I've mentioned before in other episodes that I'm one of four and I'm the youngest. And it was very difficult because being the youngest girl, I kind of adopted that natural. I never shied away from things. I was always quite independent. I jumped on a train quite early on to come up to London. And my mum was very much, she made me feel that I could do anything I wanted to do, whereby my older sister was quite quieter. And this is what happens when we're recording in the real world. That was actually my phone, guys. I'm getting deep and meaningful and my phone's going off. I'm probably going to cut this bit out anyway. So my sister was quite quiet, and my brothers, they probably hate me for saying this, were very much mothered by my mum. So I was always out doing my own thing, and when she fell sick, I realised that there was part of me that I had to almost grow up quite quickly. There were many tests for her condition, and I was ferrying myself backwards and forwards to the hospital that she had to attend to. There's lots of medical examinations, conversations, and things that I had to really bring myself up to speed about. And her decline happened very, very quickly once she had her diagnosis. And it was really a very, very difficult time because not only was my father, who has also passed away, wasn't present, I was having to deal with these feelings that many of my friends hadn't experienced yet. So I was essentially becoming the carer for my mother when at that age, it shouldn't have happened. I actually thought I had more time with my mother. Anyway, so when she actually passed away, my first reaction was of anger because and that's anger towards her, because she'd always said that she'd always be around. She'd always said that she would support me. We always spoke a lot about the future, passing out through college, moving permanently maybe to London, or maybe staying with her, maybe her being at my wedding if I chose to get married. But at that time there were boyfriends here, there, and everywhere. But you know, even my choice of lifestyle, she always encouraged me to be my own person. She was always that voice. And I think that now at 43 and being a mother, having that maternal voice is something that I've really missed. So when she passed away, I'm actually from the home counties I mentioned before, Bucks. I then just decided that I could not carry on in my hometown because I found that people found it very difficult to talk to me. It got to the point where people would see me, and like my friends would see me in town, and they would probably cross the road. Well, not probably, they would cross the road because they didn't know what to say. And that's the thing about trying to continue in talking about once we've lost somebody, continue to talk about them and normalize talking about the way we feel in times of grief and loss. Because when we don't, it becomes awkward, but it's actually a fact of life. If there's, like they say, if there's going to be two guarantees in life, you have to pay taxes and you will die. And I think that that's something that we all need to continue to do. So I left my hometown because it was just every corner I turned, there was a memory of mum. And at that time, I was working in clubs. I had passed out of college, got my degree, but I needed to move out of the family house. It was going up for sale, and I just didn't want to be there. But I found comfort and solace in being around my newfound family, which was in Clubland. And of course, nothing ever ends well in Clubland. But I was suppressing a feeling of being alone. I was out constantly. I was around people. I was surrounding myself in music. I grew up with music with my mum, and it always brought me a lot of comfort. But I felt that I was on a continuous wheel of trying not to be on my own. And as a result of that, as an impact to that, I had a relationship, my first marriage. I guess I found, and we dated for about 4 years before we got married. I found in him a security, and I don't mean by security financially. I mean security in sense of family. I married him, but I married a family because that's what I was missing, and that's what I was continually to keep searching for because I hadn't initially dealt with grief, with loss. And it was actually when he proposed was a year after that I'd lost my father, which was actually, let's do the maths. I think it was probably 4 or 5 years after I lost my mum. So I'd moved to London having lost my mum, who essentially was my best friend. And then I started dating somebody who then eventually became my husband, and something still wasn't right. For me personally, it felt like I'd lost a part of me, almost like there was this continuous hole that I was continuing to try to fill. I was trying to fill this hole up, but it was never reaching the capacity. It was always half filled. I think the analogy of a cup half filled or whatever, a cup half filled? I can't remember what it is. Half empty, half full. You get what I'm talking about, right? I was never filling that cup, despite having what I deemed was a loving relationship. We loved each other. I guess we just weren't in love with each other. I was constantly trying to fill it. I was constantly trying to replicate that feeling of love that I had for my parents and my mum in particular. and I just felt very ungrounded. I couldn't explain it to anybody. So what I didn't mention was that when my mum passed away, I sought counselling, and it didn't go well. I hadn't, whether it was not the right counsellor, therapist, whether they were just not the right individuals for me in particular. I just felt that it wasn't helping things at all, and I sought my own therapy, which was partying. I partied a lot soon after, and then into many years after losing mum. I think whilst this was happening to me, I could see in my siblings that they were all grieving in their own ways, and I was getting frustrated because they weren't grieving how I was grieving. And this is one of the first times that I realised that everybody does it in their own way. And 20 years on, we sometimes have these conversations about losing mum and dad, but I cannot expect them to feel the way that I'm feeling because it's personal to every individual. Sadly, it went on. It went on for a series of, I'd say over the next 10 years after losing mum, we lost more and more loved ones. And we are now, my siblings and I, we are now the elders of our family. So I'm 43 and my sister, oh goodness, Lorraine, how old are you? Do the maths. If I'm 43, 51, sis? Are you 51? Are you listening? Yeah, I think you're about 51. So yeah, we're quite young in that sense. Both parents passed when they were 60, which is alarming and very sad indeed, because we all have children and they're all without grandparents. And I guess whilst parenting my children, I struggle with the fact that they don't have their parents, their grandparents. My children are mixed race, my husband's white, and my children don't have their black grandparents. And I too never had my grandparents. I never met them. So there is a disconnect there, and wanting to allow my children to have that relationship with their grandparents, not really understanding what that dynamic is because I never had it myself. So there is that sense of loss, that I never had grandparents. And that, whilst trying to parent, trying to make sure I get it right, whilst also grieving for my mum. In particular, at 43 years old, I still want my mother, despite living a life of going through a marriage, a divorce, another marriage, and supposedly being an adult now. I still have moments where I am living as the 22-year-old, the 16-year-old that wants their mum. I think it's really important to, if you are in situations whereby you are trying to deal with grief. Grief does not just disappear. I'm not saying go out there, have loads of sessions of counselling, it'll disappear. What happens is that I remember people saying to me that time is a healer. It's not entirely true. Like, it's still as fresh of a memory than it was yesterday, the day that I lost my mum. But what happens is with time allows you to create your own tools, to create your own networks, to create your own coping strategies, because that pain never fades. But what does happen is that you know how to respond to that. You're more aware of what works for you and also support others. So I think it's really, if I could give anybody any advice, it would be to not try and suppress it. Not try to suppress it. Try and understand that this is our life. This is what happens. And I sit here not comfortably saying this, because even this morning before recording this, and again, this is all very new to me, that one person that would always back me, regardless if I was being a little shit, regardless if I was not, not doing things the way that she wanted me to do it, she would always back me. She would always be the voice of saying, you need to get up and do this and do it for you, not for anybody else. I really needed that this morning. It's not the easiest thing, talking into a camera, into a microphone, talking about something that is quite personal. But yeah, she was the voice that I sat and had a quiet word with this morning. And here I am, continually to listen to her somewhere. I still believe she's there or here in me to get it done. So I don't know. I don't know why I felt compelled to speak about losing mum today, and even losing dad, and even losing, I can't not mention losing another great love of my life is my cousin, Stephen, who was, when I first moved to London, he was also that voice of, you've made a mistake, you fucked up again, but pick yourself up and get going with it. So I like to talk about them. I like to say their names openly so that they don't forget. So if you are in this situation whereby you've lost somebody and you find it almost suffocating because you don't quite know how to express what you're feeling, you don't always have to. You don't always have to. But make sure that you continue talking about it, because I find that grief it's somewhere an act of love to continue talking about those that have gone. So guys, I'm always, my DMs again, and I'm sure I should put a link somewhere. I think, I'm not entirely sure where you put it. Haven't figured that bit out of this podcast yet. It was always open. So it's Sophia R. Cook via Instagram. Get in touch. Like, I'm always encouraging people to keep talking about those that aren't here, but in a way that is, you're celebrating their life. And I think once we keep them out there and we solidify their names, then it's and who they are, I think it's a beautiful thing. Guys, thank you once again for listening in, and let's speak to you soon.